This evening, chapter 2. Chapter 2, last Sunday night, we saw a rather notable miracle, did we not? Who can tell me what it was? Going once. Yes, thank you. We saw the healing, Jesus Christ healing a leper, had compassion. He reached out, he touched, and he healed a leper. And then he commanded that leper, don't say a word. And that poor excited fella, who just had a death sentence reversed, could not keep his mouth shut. Disobeyed Jesus and went and spread it much abroad so that Jesus could not only not go into the cities, he had to go out to the wilderness, and yet they still flocked to him. In Mark chapter 2, you find Jesus making his way back into the city of Capernaum. The Bible says in Mark chapter 2, verse 1, and again he entered into Capernaum after some days, and it was noised that he was in the house. And straightway many were gathered together, insomuch that there was no room to receive them. No, not so much as about the door. And he preached the word unto them. And they come unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was born of 4. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press, they uncovered the roof where he was. And when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sin be forgiven thee. I've entitled this message, With Friends Like These. Ever said that? Usually in a different context. With friends like these, who needs enemies? Is how the phrase typically goes. When you have a friend that's tried to help and perhaps hasn't, or maybe they didn't try to help. Think, wow, with friends like these, who actually needs enemies? But this evening, we're going to see that with friends like these, no obstacle is too great to bring someone to Jesus. With friends like these. First, I want us to observe and to take note of Jesus' return to Capernaum. He's returned back to the city, his base of operations, his place of residence. It says he entered into Capernaum, chapter 2, verse 1, after some days, and it was noised that he was in the house. I think this is, if you look back just a little bit, Mark chapter 1, verse 29, it says, and forthwith, when they were come out of the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. I think that they were back in Peter's house. And that's where they have taken up their residence. A return to the city. Things have died down a little bit out in the wilderness. And the attempt is to go back into the city and catch a little bit of space to breathe. It's a return to the city, but it was a return to excitement as well. The news of Jesus coming back to Capernaum spread like a fire. Can any of you relate to this tonight? That big rumors in small towns spread fast? Yeah. They sure do, don't they? Boy, it didn't take very long. The person that saw Jesus come in, and that thing starts to spread. He's in the house. Someone comes by and listens at a door, tries to peek in a window and catches a glimpse of Jesus and begins to spread everywhere. When that news spreads, people responded. The need of the people drove them to his presence. Verse 2, and straightway, immediately moving, they heard about it, they left what they were doing, and they went right to the source, to Jesus. Many were gathered together, and so much there was no room to receive them, no, not so much as about the door. You could find a lot of different guesses about what the house, Peter's house, would have looked like. From what we can gather from the evidence of the scripture, which doesn't go into great detail describing the house, this was not the house of a very wealthy person, which would have included a bottom floor, a living quarters on a second floor, and a roof. And then a more wealthy person from that would have had a courtyard or even a patio out on the second floor. Not a living quarter, but a place just out in the sun. And then from that, you would have had the gates of the home and then the street on the outside. This appears, from what we can read, what we've just read, that this house, the door opens, or I guess open like this, opens right out into the street. So a smaller residence. There's no large courtyard for people to come. But when they found there's Jesus, they had packed themselves into the house. My personal guess is that this is the classic two-story house. You had animals that would have been on the bottom floor or brought into the bottom floor during the evening. And then most of the living was done on a second floor, a second story with the roof above that. And my guess is, based on what we understand about the architecture and the evidence of the scripture, that Jesus would have been speaking from that second floor. The people at the bottom would be able to hear, and the people on the outside able to hear as well. With a ladder going up, Jesus probably would have stood beyond that ladder going back down to the first floor, and everyone packed in the bottom floor there and then out the door, which would have been visible from that point on the edge of the house looking out and down that ladder. You're painting the picture, is that making sense? But as Jesus is there, whether it's that or whether it's something different, he's there, he's preaching. They had packed themselves in the house. Sure, why not? Come on in, right? And then they're packed around the door and around the house. Any place you could get close enough to, with hushed breath, hear the words of the master teaching. Some of the people that came needed healing. The book of Luke describes more healing than the one event that we're all familiar with. Some needed to have questions answered. They had heard so much about. They hadn't yet made their own investigation into who this Jesus was. All needed to hear his preaching. His return to the city, a return to excitement, and of course, a return to preaching. In chapter 1, verse 38, as you'll recall, Jesus says, "Let us go into the next towns that I may preach there also, for therefore came I forth." The main thing is the giving out of the truth. But in Jesus' return to preaching here in Capernaum, I want you to consider what he missed out on. He missed out on time to rest and recover in comfort. As much as some of you in here might enjoy getting out into the woods and setting up a tent and enjoying some time out in the wilderness, it's nice to come home. It's nice to come home to a real bed. It's nice to come home to at least some kind of a climate-controlled environment more than your proximity to the fire out in the woods. It's nice to come home to a place that, well, ideally, you can close the door and keep some people out. In Jesus' particular situation, I don't think he got more than a matter of moments in his house before people started crowding around that door. He missed out on that time to rest and recover in comfort. Don't miss the fact that Jesus Christ was a real person in a human body, which means that he had the same temptation to be annoyed and exasperated that you and I would. We are closed for business. I got run out of here by you mob before, wanting attention. I went all out in the wilderness and y'all chased me out there. All I need is a nap. Come back in 2 hours. All I need is a chance to eat a meal in peace and private. Could you see yourself having those thoughts? Maybe you're more spiritual than I am, because I could definitely see myself having those thoughts. But what I read is Jesus, end of verse 2, and he preached the word unto them. He missed out on time, Jesus, to mentally decompress. Again, made in the form of man. He endured what you and I endure. He knows what it is to be stretched and strained and tired. And in that state, have incredible demands made on his person, on his time, on his abilities. And yet, he made time to preach the word. Why? How? Because that was his mission. It was his purpose. It was his lowest common denominator. I am here to do the will of my Father. And right now, that is to preach the word. And so he did. Return to Capernaum was a return to the city. Yes, it's a return to excitement, a return to preaching. In the midst of this time of preaching, as crowds gather and press about the house, we are introduced to what I'm going to call this evening the faithful five. We know that there was a man, a paralytic, a paralyzed man who was carried by, he was born of four. Yet we are going to see Jesus directly respond to their faith, those doing the carrying. And he's going to tell the man taken down into the home in a moment that it is his faith that saves him. And so I see a faithful five. The preaching's been going on. The crowds have gathered. These folks heard about it. I don't doubt much difference of time from the first two arrived. Again, news spreads fast, but they've got a little bit more work to do to get there. For them, it's just not a matter of tightening their sandals or running on their bare feet to go and try to get a good place in line. There's thought that has to go forward. There's organization. There's planning. There's a person to carry through a busy city. The arrival of the faithful five. Verse 3. And they come unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, one paralyzed, which was borne by, carried by, delivered by, of four. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press. We'll pause there. We look at these five men. The four that carried the one who was afflicted. We see clearly, we see immediately they had a deep concern for their friend. Consider the effort of hauling around a person through the city. People are heavy. That's not an overweight joke. That's a fact. You don't believe me? When he's feeling a little better, Henry comes back, you can carry him. Let me know when that little goober gets heavy, because it's going to happen pretty quick. All of you with little people know the truth of that. Now you're carrying somebody who can in no way assist you in transport. Yes, there's four of them. Four men carrying. But even still, the dead weight of a body, to move somebody who can't help you move, it's a lot of work. Consider the challenge that they found when they came around that last corner and they came to the house hoping to see Jesus, and all they see are the back of heads as people jostle for position. People press forward and shush each other. Luke will inform us that there are a large number of scribes and Pharisees gathered around as well, given preferential seating, though we only hear of the one in Mark. Not people whose toes you want to step on or bump with a man wrapped in a blanket. Consider the reality of their situation. There they come around that corner, that moment when the full extent of the challenge became known unto them. There's a lot of excuses you could make. Matter of fact, let's do a little exercise here this evening. What is one reason or one response, other than the one that you know that is to come, that they could have reasonably, rationally made an excuse? Well, give me one.
We'll never get close to Jesus, so let's go home.
Yeah, we're never going to do it. We cannot take 5 people and wiggle our way through a crowd that's shoulder to shoulder. You just can't do that. No one's moving. No one cares. We'll try again later. He's here. We'll try again later. What's another one?
Probably doesn't have time for us.
Look how busy that man is. Who are we? It's not going to have time for us. Ooh, how about this one? Why don't we just go and sit down over there and wait till the crowd thins out? Well, that's reasonable, isn't it? The crowds are going to thin out eventually. When they do, we'll make our opportunity. We'll go right then. As soon as the crowds thin out enough, we can make it to the door. Any others? Hey, buddy, you know I love you, but I said I'd give you half a day. This is going to take longer than half a day. And these three guys, there's four corners of this thing. We're going to have to back it up and try again. I'm sorry, I gave you what I could, but it wasn't enough. Reasonable, acceptable, but not acceptable. I think it's all five of them. But those four men, those four friends, I believe they're friends. I don't think that they're hired help. I don't see hired help doing what's about to come next, do you? They had a desire, they had a passion, they had a deep concern from their friend. They wanted to see him helped. It was greater than the burden of carrying him around. It was greater than the stigma of carting around a cripple. It was greater than the limitations of the rational, worldly thinking that we've just expressed in a couple of ideas. They believed in Jesus' power. They had faith that Jesus would not turn them away. Or I think very well, Mike, that would have been their conclusion. Wow, there's no way. I'm not going to wait in this line. Look who else is here. He's never going to see me. They had faith that Jesus could heal him, or they wouldn't have bothered at all. Matter of fact, they had faith that Jesus could do anything. My goodness, he just healed a leper. There is no upward limit on what Jesus can do, and so we're going to come and find out what it is. If he can do that for him, he can do what I need as well. Is that what people think when they look at your life? When they look at mine? Wow. If God can do that in their life, can change their life, can bring them through this challenge and this trial, bring about an answer to this prayer that they won't shut up about how they've been praying for, and now they won't shut up about how it's been answered. Why can't he do it in mine? You know, they can sit down in the bedroom of this crippled man and have this conversation and dream and plan and talk and slap each other on the back and leave. Key here is, folks, they put their feet into the work and picked the man up and went looking for Jesus. They believed in Jesus' power, and I love this. They were undeterred by obstacles. That final turn, there they are, there they see. In my imagination, I imagine they put their shoulders into the crowd. And it was when they are rebuffed, it's when they're shoved aside, it's when there is no way that they can muscle their way forward. They got to figure something else out. And they didn't decide to go sit back in the corner and wait the crowd thins out. They didn't decide to wait and see if there's another day where Jesus will be available. What they saw was, this is our moment of opportunity, and we're going to find a way to make it work. Verse 4. And when they could not come nigh him for the press, they tried and could not. They uncovered the roof where he was, and when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. Wow. And when Jesus saw, what's the next word? Their faith. What were they willing to do? They were willing to think outside of the box. They didn't wait for a better day. They didn't wait for the crowds to die down. They didn't wait for all the muckety-muckety, nose-in-the-air religious leaders to go home. They were willing to think outside the box. They were willing to make a scene. Oh my, how many good ideas have died at the thought that someone else might be inconvenienced? I'm not talking about being rude. I'm not talking about being inconsiderate, although what they did could certainly qualify as both, couldn't it? I think they doubtlessly tried to force their way forward, and when they couldn't move that forward, they hauled a crippled man onto a roof of a 2-story building. Let that sink in for a minute. If something goes wrong here, folks, it goes way wrong. They hauled a crippled man up onto a 2-story roof. That in itself is a scene. They're willing to make a scene. They were willing to make a mess. They took apart a roof. The construction of these roofs, I've heard a variety of different options. I think that for the type of dwelling place that this is, there probably were wooden planks, tiles. They're probably not granite tiles, not stone tiles. This doesn't have a courtyard. It's not a wealthy dwelling place, but wooden planks. And how they sealed that is they'd use dirt, they'd use a pitch, they'd use small stones, and they would layer these things on top. They would do their best to make a concrete-ish mix to put it off, to shed water off. So these guys dug up and then they broke in. That's exactly what they did. They uncovered. They began to dig through down that stuff and find the first seam of those boards. And then they yanked those boards up. If you got boards covered in dirt and stones, when you yank it up, what happens? All kinds of muck falls down. On who? On Jesus and the assembled people who are better than you. All the Pharisees in their beautiful clothes and tinkling bells and, oh, buddy, talk about making a mess. And they couldn't have just pulled up one plank. I don't know how wide they were, but I'm not imagining that they're 3 foot wide. They continued to tear the building up until it was large enough where they could, these inventive or resourceful or extremely well-prepared people, put ropes on the end of these blankets and lower this man down. Because when it came to getting their friend to Jesus, nobody or no thing was going to stop them. What a tenacity. What kind of a tenacity do we have about bringing the gospel, bringing Jesus to people who need it? I am not recommending cutting holes in roofs. Please don't. But are you willing to think outside of the box, outside of the norm? To be willing, perhaps, to make a little bit of a scene, even if the scene you're making is simply the fact that you are giving the gospel to the person you're giving it to. Or maybe even a mess to get the gospel to someone who needs it. When Jesus looked at these men ripping a hole in Simon and Andrew's house, he isn't thinking, what on earth are you doing? He looks at them and says, wow, what faith. They were undeterred by obstacles. How deterred are we by obstacles? I'm not asking for a story. I'm not asking for a raise of hands. I'm not asking you to do anything other than to consider in your own heart before God. What does it take to stop you when God gives you an opportunity to give out the gospel? What does it take to silence your voice? What does it take to embarrassing you into sitting back down? I don't know what it would take to stop these guys, because nothing in the world did it. They made a way for their friend to meet with Jesus. We've seen the return to Capernaum, the arrival of the faithful five. The next thing that we see is the reasoning of the wicked. The reasoning of the wicked. Verse 5 says, when Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, son, thy sins be forgiven thee, the faithful five. That man that was lowered down did not have his sins forgiven because of the faith of the four who brought him, but his own. But it was in fact the faithful actions, determined actions of the five that led to that moment. But there were certain, verse 6, of the scribes sitting there, reasoning in their hearts, why doth this man thus speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reason within themselves, he said unto them, why reason ye these things in your hearts? the reasoning of the wicked. So comes the question, did Jesus hear their thoughts as the God who knows all things? Maybe. I think that their thoughts would have been very plainly on their faces, as Jesus absolutely, 100% without a doubt, commits the death penalty worthy blasphemy in that moment. Were he not the Son of God, he would deserve, by God's own word, to be executed on the spot. I think on their face, it was as clear as the nose sitting there looking back at him. I guess noses don't look. It didn't work so well. The reasoning of the wicked. Why were they there in the first place? Let's back up a little bit. They were there because they heard about his rising popularity. They were there because they heard about his unusual preaching. He wasn't interested in quoting them. He preached as though the Bible was good enough by itself. Who does that? You preach with power and authority, not like they did. He preached with passion and conviction. And they heard about his powerful miracles. So they had come to investigate. They resented his popularity. They feared his influence. Why? He wasn't subscribed to their guidelines. He didn't toe the religious line. He wasn't subservient to their leaders. He didn't answer to somebody in a fancy hat sitting in Jerusalem. And he wasn't sitting under their teaching. They weren't getting their cut of his followers. In short, Jesus was a threat. And they were there to come and watch and observe and lay traps. They resented his popularity, they feared his influence, and they fought his claim to be God. What is blasphemy? Blasphemy is an irreverent, profane, impious speech about God, and its penalty in Old Testament times was death, according to Leviticus 24:16, which says, "And he that blasphemeth the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death, and all the congregation shall certainly stone him, as well as the stranger, as he that is born in the land. When he blasphemeth the name of the Lord, shall be put to death." And mortal man, claiming to be God or do works that only God can do, was blasphemy, which means that they rightly interpreted Jesus' claim to forgive sins as being God. They rightly understood that blasphemy had just been committed. And if we think back to this morning's message, what is a leader supposed to do when wrong is done? They're supposed to confront it. They're supposed to deal with it. Now they're in shock and they're in a bit of a quandary. Because the last thing I'm going to get ahead of myself. Last thing they want to do is mess up the good thing they've got going. Isaiah 43 verse 25 says, "I, even I, am he that blotteth out thy transgressions for my own sake, and will not remember thy sins." God says, "I, even I, am he that blotteth out transgressions." Who can forgive sins? God forgives sins. They are right. But who's Jesus? Oh, he's God. I've read, in preparing for this message, that in the Jewish teaching, in their own set of laws, they believe that even the Messiah would not be able to forgive sins because the Messiah was not God alone. Bit of convoluted thinking. So in their mind, no person that could speak with the voice of a man could forgive sins. Hence, they're shocked. But they find themselves without an answer. This bit of discourse here is one of the maybe top 3 in the entire Bible. This is awesome. Jesus understands, whether that is through his divine nature or because their mouths all just fell open in unison, that they understand that he just committed blasphemy. And Jesus, as God in a human body, is not going to miss this opportunity to teach them that he is in fact God. They found themselves without an answer because they did not understand who Jesus is. They refused to admit what he was done, and they feared hurting their own bottom line. Confronting a popular prophet without overwhelming evidence could drive people and their offerings away from the synagogues. Back down in verse 8. And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, why reason ye these things in your hearts? Whether is it easier to say to the sick of the palsy, thy sins be forgiven, or to say, arise and take up thy bed and walk? Oh, you feel the moment building. You see the faces of these proud men beginning to turn scarlet red. Who do you think you are as you sit there and ponder? Who is it that can forgive sins? I got a question for you. Which one's easier? Which one can you do better? Forgive his sins or make him stand up and walk? I don't know if there's silence after this moment, but in my mind there is, and you could hear a pin drop, and you could hear blood beginning to boil. Verse 10, but that ye may know that the Son of Man, that title being an absolute claim to deity, hath power on earth to forgive sins. Now Jesus focused, his eyes turned to the paralyzed man. He saith the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, arise and take up thy bed, go thy way into thine house. And immediately he arose. Woo, that's good stuff. There they sit questioning the master, the God of the universe who had come for their salvation. And in shock and horror, they hear words that are as clear a tone of blasphemy as a man could make. Begin to rage in their hearts, and then they're called out in front of the people. Well, tell me, you who sit there angry about what God's done and is about to do, forgiving sins. By the way, when Jesus saw that man, did he see one need or he see two? The answer is two. That man had an eternal need. The same eternal need that all men have. And he had a physical need. Now, the physical need, any one of us could look at and they could see with our eyes and they could understand. Those Pharisees couldn't, and you and I cannot today look in someone's heart and say, look at that, I see sin, I don't see sin, I see salvation, I don't see salvation. You and every other man living lacks that ability, so don't believe the ones that say they've got it. But Jesus did. And when he told that man, your sins are forgiven, that man knew it too, because Jesus said it. But as a testimony, as a witness to everyone else who was standing there, and I believe out of his intention to help the man's physical need as well. He says, let me give you something you can see. Stand up, take your bed, and walk. And he stands up, picks up his bed, and walks. You know, they had an awful hard time walking into that door, but I doubt he had too much a hard time walking out of it. My guess is people parted like water as that man walked out. We see the reward of the faithful. He received forgiveness of sins. This is saving faith. There are some people that speculate it was a specific issue that the man was paralyzed because of some sin, whether it was paralyzed in the act of doing wrong or something else. There certainly was a widespread belief in those days that physical illnesses were a result of sin. Remember the friends of Job, those wonderful, helpful, encouraging gentlemen. They thought him and accused him repeatedly of being guilty of some unknown, hidden, atrocious wickedness because he had suffered. And naturally followed in their thinking that this healing depended upon forgiveness. Maybe that's why Jesus first addressed the forgiveness of sins. I think it's the more important issue, and that's why he did it. But Jesus provided proof in commanding him to take up his bed and carry it out. The eternal needs came first, but he didn't neglect the physical needs. He was healed completely, instantly, and publicly. And the 5 men that came to Jesus received more than they could have ever imagined. They came hoping for physical healing. And they found forgiveness of sins. I like this. He came in lying on a bed, and he left with a bed lying on his back. The bed carried him in, he carried the bed out. He came in with no hope of walking, but walked out with his one hope of resting. I mean, this is the power of Jesus Christ to utterly change this man's reality. And God can provide more for you and for me than we can possibly imagine. So take your needs before the throne. Come boldly with confidence and find the strength, the help, the mercy that we need during our time of need. Verse 12 says, and immediately he arose and took up the bed. Oh, that's a moment I want to watch if God lets us do those kind of things. I want to sit there as the fly on the wall, and I want to watch. I want to see the look on that man's face when he knows in his mind that his body has been healed before his legs move. Because his face knew it before his feet knew it. I want to see the looks on those Pharisees' face after they've just been called out. Which one of these is easier, forgiving sins or making the lame to walk? Answer. No answer? Fine, I'll tell you, because I'm doing both. Stand up and walk, take your bed and get out of here. And he stands up and walks and leaves. You know what I don't read in the rest of this chapter? I don't read any more smart comments by the Pharisees or scribes, do you? I think their mouths got well and truly shut on that day. In the midst of the busyness and strain of life right now, let's keep the main thing the main thing. Let's keep our heartbeat, our awareness, to share the gospel with those who need it. There were 5 men that made their way slowly, with difficulty, to find a great deal more difficulty. They had to make a decision. Or perhaps they made the decision long before that they ever had the opportunity again to find Jesus, that they would get there no matter the difficulty. We decide in our hearts if God gives us an opportunity, and we're not going to let that thing get away, no matter what. Friends, when that opportunity comes, they'll already be moving in the right direction. I don't know what it'll look like for you. I don't know every personal opportunity that God has brought across your path, the influence that he's given you, the favor he's bestowed upon you. But I do know, if we've accepted Jesus Christ as our Savior, then there's a great commission to us that involves going and telling. It's not a question, and there's no exceptions. And for us to achieve it is simply a matter of knowing how I got saved and being able to communicate it, and being willing to do so when God lets the opportunity. Those 4 men that brought that man to Jesus were willing to do the hard things. They're willing to make a scene. They're willing to make a mess. Bob doesn't tell me. My mind likes to think that those fellows went back and put a roof back together. Whether they did or they didn't, I tend to think that Simon and Andrew and those living in that house thought it a small price to pay to see Jesus save a man, not just his body, but forgive his sins as well. So let us go forth from this room tonight with our hearts and minds fresh with the praises of this body of believers, with our hearts and minds challenged to be willing to do the work, if need be, to make a scene or a mess, if it means that we bring the gospel to someone desperately seeking it and needing their Savior. Heads are bowed and eyes are closed. Father, I ask that you would help us to be motivated by the severity of the problem as well. Although we wouldn't be so busy, we wouldn't be so weighted down by our own genuine needs, Lord, that we miss the opportunity or push away the opportunity to share the gospel with those who are seeking. Help us to have the tenacity to find a way to give out the gospel, or to gain a hearing Lord, I ask as we approach the holiday season that you would, Lord, you would do a work in the hearts of those that we have loved and prayed for and desired their salvation. Lord, that you would give them a tender heart. And Father, that we would love people through difficult times. Perhaps the making a scene, the making a mess will be us going into a situation where a scene is being made and there already is a mess. To gently, perhaps firmly, explain the gospel of Jesus Christ. Lord, I ask that you would fan the flame of the desire of the command that you've given to all those who have already called on your name to share the gospel this evening. Heads are bowed and eyes are closed. What a blessing it is to trust and obey. Tonight, I ask you simply this: determine, decide in your heart that you will trust God's leading, and that when he presents an opportunity, you will obey his lead in your life. Heads are bowed and eyes are closed. The Lord has worked in your heart. The pianos are going to play. I ask that you stay seated this evening, but do business with God.